So welcome. While it is April 1st, we're not fooling at all about again some of these important issues. So again, we welcome you. We are, for those who may not be familiar with the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network, we are a mission-driven industry organization. Our job is to pull together the food and beverage industry of Chicagoland to leverage it to do great things, grow the industry, grow the local economy, and create jobs. Now, we've had this mission in place for our full 3 years. Actually, it's almost 3 years to the day since we launched. And I'll tell you, especially in these trying times, I don't think those goals could be any more sort of salient and important than they are now. The way we'll be doing that may look a little bit different, but those goals still are incredibly important to us. I'll also say we have 125 corporate members, large, medium, and small companies, really who create the network and really make all of this work. Typically, we would go through quite a few logos, and you can see who all of those are. We welcome you to visit our website and take a look at what those are, because we really want to keep this conversation very focused and get into the heart of the matter quickly. I will also note that we are launching a new nonprofit, great timing, I'd say, called The Bigger Table. The Bigger Table, again, leverages this incredible ecosystem we have here in the greater Chicagoland area to address issues that are challenging to our local communities: food insecurity, unemployment, inclusive economic development. Again, couldn't be a better time and a time when this is more needed in our community. I will say that my days and nights are spent working with folks to try and make sure that their supply chains are working in places like food banks to ensure that, I'll say, that the most vulnerable among us have access to nutritious food during these trying times. Bigger Table is again launching in this difficult environment, but is dedicated to these incredible principles on an ongoing basis. With that, I will introduce Joel Warady, who's both a terrific speaker and strategic advisor, but also the chairman of the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network. With that, take it away, Joel.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. As Alan said, this is the first episode of F&B-45. I am going to host every episode. It is a bi-weekly event. And, you know, we'll see an evolution as this is the first one. You know, we'll have some learnings from this one. And over time, I think you'll see changes. We appreciate all of you who are logging on, and this is also going to be recorded and will be available on the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network site after this recording. So today we're going to be talking about supply chain, and we have two individuals who are experts at it. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves each. John, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute. There you go. And we'll start with you, John. Do you want to just introduce yourself and a quick background of yourself and your company?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here today. I am John Ferguson. I've been with GlobalTranz for 9 years. I am the Director of Customer Operations, so I oversee our account management department. I oversee, you know, a lot of the client interactions on a day-to-day basis. And so a lot of my history is all in, you know, I started from the ground up, loading trucks back in 2008, and I've worked my way up to where I'm at today. I've done the carrier sales side, so I've worked extensively with the carrier network. So I have a pretty extensive background in procurement and pricing, and mainly all domestic truckload freight across the U.S. Really, really excited to be here today, Joel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, John. And Dan?
Yeah, so my name is Dan Creinin. I'm with a company called Elemica. We are actually a new sponsor of the Chicagoland Food and Beverage Network. And I am, and my daughter is just waking up, so that's kind of exciting. So I've been in and out of technology throughout my entire career, whether it's been software, some hardware development. I am an industrial engineer by my education, so I'm a very process-oriented person. And you know, when I think about supply chain, I think about things in Gantt charts and think about how quickly you can, you know, compress cycles and make them better. And these are whether it's like document management in terms of understanding where the documents are coming from, or it's process improvement. It's something that I have a passion around process improvement. And when I consider this supply chain, I think about the products that we represent in the market. Those are the things that I consider when I think about supply chain optimization and making sure things go well. So that's my background, and thank you. And we're very appreciative of being asked to participate in this. So.
Thanks, Dan. And you know, for everyone who is participating, you know, this is part of the new normal. Kids walking in the background, waking up late, and we're all getting used to it. So we appreciate it, and no worries. So let's jump into some of the questions that I have with respect to supply chain. You know, there's no question that in the month of March, we saw consumers doing a significant amount of pantry loading, which resulted in what some are calling panic buying. In fact, Kroger just released some numbers this morning that March saw a 30% increase in sales versus March of last year. So I guess question number one, what are we seeing with respect to the transportation demands from food and beverage manufacturers? How much of an increase are we seeing with respect to transportation?
Yeah,
John, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Joel. Well, first, just to speak right on that, you know, I'm super appreciative of all the truckers out there. I've been seeing a lot of posts out there about thank a trucker. You know, so that's without them, none of the panic buying or any of those items would be even possible. So what we've seen over at GlobalTranz, both through our carrier procurement department and also on a client perspective, we really saw that peak on week 12, which would be approximately March 22nd for the ending. And that was the peak of the market dynamics that we saw. So that began with large truckload volumes across the board. And then we've really seen that kind of escalate down. So from essential items to non-essential items. So as the shippers have began to close, the real shift has all moved over to essential shipping. And so the trucks are really looking just to move those items. Capacity has been displaced. It's really been causing a lot of market imbalance, and we really saw that peak in week 12. And so as a result, some of those carriers are now saturated, while some of the other shipments in other markets, they're still struggling to find loads. But the real focus is on groceries and discount stores where, you know, my wife packed up on toilet paper and bottled water. I think I still have like 4 cases in the garage. But that's what we've really been seeing. And as the week's been going down, we've really seen that capacity start to open up as some of these non-essential shippers have closed. We're seeing some of those dedicated retail fleets now looking to take their capacity and shift it over to these more essential areas such as grocery, food, and beverage.
All right, so
yeah, so
I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a question, Dan, and maybe you can answer because I want to make it succinct. Do we have a capacity issue today?
So you know, I'll give you the standard consultant answer. It depends. Right. So in some industries, it is very like what John was saying, you know, so I interact with a lot of manufacturers. And if you're like, so Sargento Foods, I had a conversation with them. They're running where they may have been running, you know, 5 days a week. They're running 7 days a week. And if you saw in the market that there's, you know, Mondelez is hiring 1,000 employees. So there's definitely lots of activity in the food and beverage space. and also looking back one level back. So I've been having conversations with a large packaging producer for cans, and they are, they're running their shifts 24/7 because everything is shelf stable. So the market is going to be directly dependent on who your customers were before all this stuff happened, because they're not going to go through a qualification process for, typically they're not going to go through qualification processes. They're going to suck up all the capacity that they can get in the loads that they are moving. And to your point, John, if you look in the market, there's a very large local 3PL that their business is primarily located with Amazon, and now they're running some headwinds because people are, it gets to the essential equipment or the essential things that need to be shipped. So what we're seeing and when I'm talking to customers is kind of where they are. So a lot of it's just going to depend on the markets that you serve.
Yep.
So.
All right, so let me ask a question, a kind of a follow-up question. So we entered 2020 with the understanding, we saw a lot of reports that we were short about 50,000 long-haul truck drivers in the United States. And, anyone who's followed press conferences from the CDC or the White House says, we're about to see over the next 2 to 3 weeks a significant increase in people that are testing positive. So let's assume that we're going to lose 20% of our truck drivers just because they test positive. What does our capacity look like for the month of April and the month of May? And let's not be consultants, because we don't want to cover our rear ends. We've got people who want to know, are we going to see a capacity shortage in the next 30 to 60 days? John, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Joel. Great question. So as far as a capacity crisis or crunch, I haven't heard anything about that, but the average age of a truck driver is 50 years old approximately. So one of the primary ways that GlobalTranz is focusing on demand is through greater efficiency within our own network. So we emphasize digital freight matching. What that is what's better than the one truck that you have in your network already, right? You know who the driver is, you know their setup. So inside of our network, we're trying to utilize those same drivers and keep them running from point A to point B to point C and then back. We don't want a lot of churn in our network. We really want to focus. So to get back to your question of if there was a 20% reduction inside of a network, I mean, that's going to be a capacity crunch. That's going to drive rates up, Joel. So what would happen is, obviously, the word essential is being thrown out there. The focus would be on essential versus non-essential goods. And then the next prioritization would obviously likely be that shippers are going to be focusing on the truckers will be focused on who's paying more. And then they'll have their pick of the trucks depending on what rates are.
Dan, anything to add to that?
My response, if I am a shipper, what I would be doing is hedging my bets right now. I would think about, looking a little bit outside of, my comfort zone. If you see that there's going to be capacity issues within a certain market, I would try to, as quickly as possible, qualify other shippers that may not necessarily be so busy. So it's going to. Where you focus your activities, you can try and squeeze blood from a stone. But if there's not capacity within a given logistics provider, I would try and focus my efforts in finding other ones and qualifying them. What's the minimum amount of qualification activities that you can do to bring a carrier on board, and really understand what their value is in this. Are they are they an asset-based carrier, or are they a 3PL? How can you quickly make decisions so that you can get your goods from point A to point B? If there's going to be a shortage, find alternative means to fill that, and find and find carriers that you may not have considered in the past that may be a good way to augment your capacity.
All right, so all great information. Two quick questions, just following up on something you both said. So when it comes to essential goods, we've used that term a couple times. You know, who's deciding on what's essential, and is it subjective? So for instance, are milk and bread, are they essential? And if a logistics firm has an opportunity to deliver gloves and masks from one facility, does that supersede milk and bread? John?
Yeah, great question, Joel. And, you know, I don't think that there is a specific limitation on, you know, essential. I mean, food right now, obviously, and water and beverages, those are, you know, getting a huge, I mean, they're essential, right? People need those items. So if to supersede the gloves and the masks, absolutely. I mean, those are, you know, those would take priority over anything. And I would hope that, you know, maybe that is being communicated to the carrier network and to those drivers as well. So who's making those decisions? You know, I would believe that that's the carrier network who's on there. Those opportunities, I bet, would be going to some more of the national carriers who probably have some stronger relationships within, you know, whether it's FEMA or anybody else who's helping supply those items inside their network. But again, you know, it possibly could come down to price as well.
So let me ask about price. You know, there's supply and demand, and we understand supply and demand from Econ 101. If there is more demand than supply, prices go up. Right. Yet we also know that during a crisis or during a situation that we're in, the government is asking people not to gouge in pricing. So, right. Dan, you know, where's the line? Are logistics companies, are transportation companies allowed to continue to raise prices based on simple demand, or is there a cap as to how high they can go?
You know, I would hope so. I would hope that logistics providers are aware of the current situation and that they are not going to, you know, people have, how about this? People have long memories. And if in a time of crisis you gouge people, I would imagine that that's not going to be good for the long-term prospects of the you know, for that company. So I think you have to balance what you're pricing. If you're a provider, I think you have to balance your pricing in a way that makes sense for both the times that you are in and you know, if you feel like, you know, we struggle with this a little bit when we do contract renewals, right? You know, can you justify an increase in pricing based off the same services you were providing before, right? And in some cases, you have legitimate cause, like, you know, cost of living increases, things like that. But then, could you charge your customers more? You know, absolutely, but it's kind of like kicking a man down. That doesn't really make sense to do that in times like this. So I think you have to have a balancing act, and you have to be able to set expectations throughout the entire value chain for a logistics provider. So, you know, if drivers are asking for more money, that's one thing, because there may be some more risk with them. They may have to be sleeping in their trucks. They may have to purchase things on the road that they may not have had to do in the past. But they may have to accommodate. Maybe they have to have two drivers because there's no place to stay, right? That you can't find a hotel and they're sleeping in their trucks, or because it is an essential thing, you're going to see team driving across long hauls, right? So where costs may have been a little bit lower, the priority is to move the goods. So you may have some increased costs, but to gouge the market, I don't necessarily think is a good idea. So
yeah, great point, Dan. They do have a long memory. I think that's a great point, but so we are beginning to see over at GlobalTranz, we're beginning to see the demand and the capacity both kind of sort of taper off a little bit. Again, week 12 was that peak point that we saw everything kind of hit. But now what are we coming into? We're going to start seeing a little bit of that seasonal produce. It's starting to show a little bit of activity, especially after a really mild winter that we had. And then you never know if once the coronavirus, COVID-19 passes a little bit and the ports begin to open, we're going to see some more spikes in activity over there. So the demand curve doesn't just go straight up and to the right. You know, it's up and it's down. It's very fluid. And we try and manage that over at GlobalTranz with our clients, you know, and keep them knowledgeable about the market. And one way that I do know that GlobalTranz and myself, we really focus on, we try to focus on creating dedicated solutions. So we have a pop-up fleet option that we will bring to our clients and discuss pricing so that we don't run into those situations of, you know, you're talking about gouging. Because that is, again, to Dan's point, and I really like that, is the clients have long memories, and we don't want to be the one that's in there trying to take advantage of people, especially in a market where people need us. They need the truckers, you know, and as a freight logistics company, we're sort of that middleman, but we're also the partner that keeps the clients aware of what is going on in the market, right? Sometimes it's difficult to relay what those truck drivers are seeing on a day-to-day basis. We're hearing a lot of it on LinkedIn and the news. You know, you're seeing a lot of fantastic stories out there about kids bringing truckers sandwiches. I mean, those are really, really fantastic stories. And that's the direction I really hope the America keeps going in, is let's try and be united together and overcome this.
And let me just add one more point to that. I think that, you know, I thought you brought up an interesting comment about, you know, let's just say produce, right? There are going to be some seasonal items that are coming up, and you know, there's going to be a need for there's going to be a need for some specific types of logistics providers that you know, if everybody's really focusing, let's just say have a certain type of they're a logistics provider for, let's just say, chemicals, right? And there's now all of a sudden a need for moving fresh produce, right? Those are different kinds of logistics challenges. Chemicals can stick around. You know, they can be put into a place and they can stay there. If you have, you know, fresh vegetables, you know, whatever, the seasonality of these things does not end. You know, they grow and they come up out of the ground, and you have to be able to respond to that. So I think that there's a bit of there's some, like you said, there's some fluidity in the market, and a lot of it is going to be directly dependent upon the items that you're shipping, the market need for them, and the broad overreaching, you know, is this essential, is this not essential, and where does this product fit within that continuum?
So I want thank you guys. Great perspective. I want to ask one other question about pricing, and then I want to move on. And that is, you know, we all have been experiencing over the last 3 years fuel surcharges that have been added to our bills. Those of us who are manufacturers, and what we do know right now is, because of crazy things that Saudi Arabia and Russia are doing, the fuel prices across the country are lower than they've been in about 10 years. Have any of the trucking firms removed the fuel surcharges, and can manufacturers ask for those fuel surcharges to be removed? John, I'll start with you.
Yeah, good question again, Joel. So, you know, in some of the fuel surcharge charts that we have, it does come to a point on some of them where if the fuel goes low enough, it does cancel it out. I have not seen or heard that look to be taken off so far, but you know, a lot of that is already built into a lot of these agreements ahead of time. You know, from a large brokerage standpoint and from a client standpoint, you know, I don't think anybody anticipated the fuel to go down this low. But we always kind of hedge our bets and make sure that we have our I's dotted and our T's crossed. So I have not seen or heard any of chatter about that yet. But, you know, great question, and it's something to keep our eyes on open for the future.
Hey, John, I have a quick, if you don't mind, Joel, I have a quick follow-up to that. So let's just say that, you know, a shipper moves from one carrier to another, and there's like increased accessorial freight cost management things happening. Are you seeing any, with your kind of finger on the pulse of this a little bit more than what we're seeing? What are you seeing as it relates to kind of like freight cost issues that may be coming from carriers that have to repurpose some of their assets to things that they may not have carried in the past?
Do you have an example, Dan?
Cleaning charges, or, if you haven't hauled food before, now you have to repurpose your trucks, you have to clean it, or, so things like that, right? Like, have you seen any like chatter about that in your world, or is that like, what's your pulse on that?
Sure. No, it's a good question as well, Dan. So a carrier knows if they have a food grade trailer or not. So the ones that don't have food grade trailers and they're trying to repurpose them, I don't know a lot of good scenarios where that's worked in, because typically the ones that don't have food grade trailers were hauling scrap metal, or they were hauling some sort of other odorous product that kind of infiltrates the trailer, and it's very difficult to get that out. But they could get trailer washes, which I don't believe are extremely expensive. So I have seen items like that where they can go get a trailer wash, get it cleaned out, let it air dry. And then shippers have loaded them in the past. But the only item that I've heard for repurposing is that, the U.S. government has, relieved some of the ordinances around like how much you can haul. So I have seen some carriers repurpose their trucks, whether it's sliding the tandems or, going straight to day cabs, so that they can haul either A, larger amounts of food, or they can haul B, more larger amounts of beverages such as water.
All right, guys, we've got about 4 minutes before we jump into questions that we're getting from the participants. We have a lot coming in. So I'm going to ask for short answers to some follow-up questions that I have. Let's go further back to the supply chain, and let's talk about ingredients that are coming in from outside of North America. I use as examples quite a bit vanilla from Madagascar, or cocoa, or cacao, or coffee coming from Ghana and Ivory Coast. It's my understanding that ports are not operating at 100%. So, what are we seeing, certainly on the East Coast ports like New York, Baltimore, Virginia? What are we seeing down in Louisiana? What are we seeing in Long Beach and LA? I'll start with you, John.
Sure, absolutely. So all of the ports are open: New York, New Jersey, Port of Long Beach, LA, Port of Miami, and the Houston channels. I know they are operating a little bit less right now. I did read an article the other day that said the Port of LA is operating at 80%. But I do know that, freight from China to the West Coast ports has slowed nearly to a stop, right? And that totally makes sense with COVID-19 going on. But let's say that there was a reduction in port workers as, an effect of COVID-19. We definitely see a slowdown in unloading and loading of the ships, and that would 100% create a ripple effect throughout the supply chain that would affect the rest of our network. But another item that we are seeing, Joel, is that we're already seeing container shortages as a result of the stoppage of cargo from China. So that is affecting our network already. But specifically about vanilla from Madagascar, or I loved how you said it, cacao, from Africa. But I don't have any specific items like that, but I do know that the ports are open, operational, but as I mentioned, some of those containers can have a ripple effect throughout the network and affect other areas in logistics.
And Dan, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
We haven't talked about air freight. So we know that the passenger planes are basically flying at 10% capacity. They all have cargo holds. Is air freight an option? And do we know if the air freight companies or the airlines are offering discounts to keep their employees working and the planes flying, even if it were predominantly with cargo?
Well, I would imagine that if you're if you're an airline, you're scrambling to find revenue, because outside of the very large check that's going to be written to them, they are, they have very expensive, capital budgets that they're managing. So if you're an airline, is there a way for you to be able to, move things from point A to point B faster? Absolutely. So it's going to, they are going to be interested in keeping themselves going. And if you have some critical parts or critical ingredients that need to be moved, and it's still at a port or it's still at a place to move it forward, I would imagine that things clearing through an airport would be a little bit faster than clearing it through a dock, because there's fewer points in between. So I would imagine that those folks are very interested in earning the business at this point, because they have the capacity. Why wouldn't they at least offer it in a way that makes economic sense, but just like you said, keeping the employees happy. So keeping them there and keeping them working.
And John, with respect to truck shipments, LTL and full trailer, we know that the borders between Canada and the U.S. and Mexico and the U.S. have been closed to individuals. Are we still able to ship cross-border, and can it go both ways?
Sure. Great question, Joel. I'm glad we touched on it. So I had a chance to touch base with our Mexico division for GlobalTranz yesterday, and in preparation for this conversation, and the Canadian border and the Mexico borders are obviously both closed to non-essential travel, but they do remain open for cargo shipments. So some of the retail items and exports from Mexico that are particularly like retail goods, they have peaked, but automotive exports, those have decreased drastically, right? And that market has essentially been shut down. So the trade does continue to flow like normal conditions, but some of the ports of entry between the U.S. and Mexico have really, really slowed down. So also the one thing I do want to mention is that used to be a heavy flow of northbound freight out of Mexico. So that continued due to a lot of panic purchasing. So what we're seeing now is a lot of issues is going into Mexico, going back down. But GlobalTranz as a whole, we've been managing through the capacity. We've been able to really leverage our network from both door-to-door and direct carrier partners. So we've really tried to focus on cross-docking facilities, as a lot of those carriers don't want to drive and take their trailers directly into Mexico anymore. So now we've been working with cross-dock facilities to, a lot of clients and customers that weren't interested in that. They were ready for just, take it from point A to point B. Now they're looking at options of cross-docking so carriers don't have to take their trailers each way.
Okay, great.
Let me just a quick follow-up with that. I had a very interesting discussion with a number of folks about, what's the long-term effects of this? I would imagine that there's going to be a much more heavy interest in not having as much inventory on the water. So, the ocean folks, I think that if you are, I think if you can establish a much closer relationship with some of your suppliers, I think the overall landed cost is something that's going to be considered, as well as, not just the piece price. So I think that organizations are going to look at potentially opening up supply chain partnerships in closer places, so that they can react more efficiently to any kind of spikes, or they can react more efficiently to market conditions. Yep. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think if you look over the last decade or 20 years, we've all moved to just-in-time models, and we went to just-in-time models with international suppliers, and we're all getting caught short. So I think we've learned our lesson. So now we're going to see how great you guys are, because we have a lot of a lot of participants asking questions. Awesome. And I'm going to give you the hardest one first, which is what are our expectations 3 months from now? you know, what do we think supply and demand will look like? And the question is, will we drop down to 2018 or 2019 levels again? So, you know, if we assume, Dan, I don't know if you were reading the tea leaves just then, but
yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. I was looking at the bottom of my cup.
Right.
Hey, so unfortunately I was drinking coffee, so there are no tea leaves on the bottom of this. Yeah,
what,
you know,
what
if
do you
I,
guys,
how about,
what do you guys see for you know, 3-4 months out? What do you think in your opinion? John, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, you know, I want to put it this way just because I want everything to go back to normal here. You know, it'd be fantastic if, you know, we went back to 2019 again and, you know, rates were a little bit lower. And I don't want to be chastised for saying that, but what that would mean is that, you know, we've overcome, you know, COVID-19. Things are starting to get back to normal. The ports are open. We're starting to see some more of, you know, the day-to-day life that we've been accustomed to for so long. So where do I see us at in the next 30 days? I still see us, you know, inside, stay at home, still social distancing a lot. And I still see us a big focus on retail, consumer goods as far as, you know, food and beverage and those items. You know, and one thing I didn't mention earlier, but I still believe there's a lot of capacity out in the market because a lot, you know, we shifted from, you know, restaurants, right? That was where we're at in America. We go out to eat once a week. I mean, my wife wanted to go out to eat every single night if she could. And it's really shifted from that restaurant focus to grocery stores. So that capacity where we were really focused on restaurant has been able to shift over to, you know, distribution centers and grocery stores. So I don't see the market driving up again unless we see some unprecedented items happen with, you know, COVID-19. And I do not want that at all. I'd rather the rates go back down and everyone's healthy and okay with their families. In 60 days, hopefully things are starting to taper off and slow down. And in 90 days, you know, hopefully we're, you know, 4th of July, buying tons of hot dogs, burgers, and loading up on water and beer and just having a fantastic time. That's really, really what I would like to see. But I don't see, you know, capacity taking this huge dive and then, you know, other items. At least I really hope not. You know, otherwise that's not putting us in a good spot here.
Right. So my answer to that question would be, I think that organizations are going to throw everything on the table and say, how do we get to this position? What can we do to make things better? And you know, from my standpoint, I think that technology has a role to play in that. I think that organizations are really going to look at, you know, how can we react to situations? How can we manage risk? How can we gain visibility into a given set of processes so that we can have advanced information about where things are, spend less time on the phone, spend more time in their current systems of record to be able to say, hey, this is what's going on. This is where we need to, instead of, you know, focusing on the individual transactions, set of capabilities, let's look at the broader picture and what can, you know, how do we use technology to gain insight into what's going on around us? Because once you have that, then you're flying in a much better, you're in a much better position to be able to make strategic decisions and move forward with that. So in my mind, I think what will happen is for, let's just say 3 months out, whenever, you know, I as much as I would love to, you know, think that this is going to work itself out, and I don't think anybody really knows. But I think that this gives organizations an opportunity to look at the way that they communicate with their carrier networks, look at the way that they plan things, and to begin to, you know, hopefully for me, invest in technologies to make that happen.
So Dan, just talking about technology, you know, one of the things that we're hearing is that when the drivers show up for delivery, that they're seeing extended wait times, sometimes 6, 7, 8 hours while they're in queue. Can you talk, you know, really quickly about things like time slot management and how can we reduce those wait times, or is it just something we're going to have to live with right now?
I think it's a learning curve. Right now, there's yes, so time slot management is important, but time slot management is really good when really works well when you have specific bays for specific items. So if you have a whole bunch of stuff that needs to only go through a certain bay, time slot management becomes critical. If you have I was actually having this discussion with a beer manufacturer, and they don't need time slot management because all their products can go out any bay door, right? So I do think that there are some legs to some of these things depending on the industry that you're in. So it's time slot management, it's visibility, it's how much paperwork do you have to process before this? So where a driver may have had to drop off a packet, let's just say a bunch of COAs that they need to confirm against against specifications. Some of this information, if you can use technology to dramatically decrease the receiving processes of a given item, I think that organizations, at least from a logistics perspective and a material receiving perspective, can use technology to optimize those processes.
Yep. All right, great. We have a couple more questions that I definitely want to get to. So one of the questions, we have some people who are watching live right now who are not on the manufacturing side and not on the logistics side. They're consumers. And the question is, what can consumers do to help with the logistics and help with easing the transportation spikes that we've been seeing? John, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first, that's a great question from the audience there, and it's awesome to see that people are aware of what's going on out there and show an appreciation and want to help. I mean, I think that's a great first step. As I mentioned earlier, you do hear the bad stories of not wanting to let truck drivers in or let them use the restroom or let them get a sandwich, but you also hear the great stories out there of people trying to help truck drivers out, give them some food, let them park in their parking lots. So, if you see it, just show your appreciation, wave to them. If you get a chance, tell them thank you. There's been so many fantastic posts on LinkedIn about Thank a Trucker and telling the stories and people sharing those stories. Just the appreciation. I know when people slap me on the back and say, attaboy, it feels good. So if you, from that perspective, just telling them thank you. And that trend has been really, really awesome to see over the past week to 2 weeks now. And I think that is going to continue to grow because if the truckers weren't there, everything would shut down right now. So the appreciation and what these truck drivers are doing, it's 100% essential. I can't even imagine what the stress level is sometimes on these drivers going into some of these areas to help keep these essential items available for the consumers out there. So just first, even asking that question and it being at the forefront of your mind that's huge. If you get the opportunity, just say thank you.
Well, great. I've got a 30-second. I'm going to ask one last question to each of you, starting with you, Dan. And I need a 30-second response. In your opinion, Dan, are we going to see a food shortage in our grocery stores over the next 60 to 90 days?
That's not a fair question. I hope not. I don't. The food producers and their upstreams or their suppliers are working to make that happen. Make sure that there isn't. So. I sure hope not. I think that everybody is interested in making sure that doesn't take place, and they're going through heroics to do it. It's all hands on deck. Yeah. Yep.
John, do you feel the same?
My answer is no. We are not going to see a food shortage. A couple items that I did bring out here. So from a consumption standpoint, the week 12 that I mentioned earlier, fresh meat sales increased 100%, canned tuna by more than 200%. Dried beans by over 400% compared to the year earlier. So, and now the shelves are completely restocked now. But I do not believe the U.S. is going to run out of food. I see more of a food waste problem that we have versus a shortage. 30 to 40% of the food in America is wasted annually. So I think due to a lot of advanced agricultural supply chain items in the US, I think we're going to be fine. There's a lot of disposable income that we were using on food too. But I do believe that we are not going to have a food supply chain problem.
Well, great. And with respect to food waste, I want everyone to know I'm doing my part. Last night I ate 2 turkey burgers that had freezer burn because they've been in the freezer for 2 years. But
2 years? Oh my God.
I'm still alive. So we are out of time.
Apparently you're still alive.
Dan and John, you guys have been great. I really appreciate your answers. I know that you have a ton of knowledge, and it was great to have you both. So I appreciate it. I know Alan wants to do a quick wrap up, and then we'll be done. Alan?
I just want to thank Dan from Elemica and John from GlobalTranz for sharing the insights, and thank you, Joel, for asking tough questions. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. We will be doing this on an ongoing basis. We very much want to keep this incredible ecosystem and community connected, even when it becomes more difficult like this. So please do check our website and check other places, social media, chief among them, to see just what's going on. We will be adding some interesting content. We're experimenting with some different formats, so we're always open to your feedback on what are interesting topics, what should we be talking about, who should we be bringing together, and again, want to keep this, this network alive, and a real conversation starting. We wish we could be sharing cocktails and appetizers, and we will again someday soon. But in the meantime, the engagement, there you go. In the meantime, the engagement is incredibly, incredibly important. So thank you all.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
this is great. Thank you for allowing me to participate.
You bet.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, be safe.
Bye.